The Washington Huskies and Michigan Wolverines are set to do battle tonight to determine this season's national championship. But what about next season? What about when everything changes in college football? What about 2024, Washington's first season in the Big Ten Conference? Can the Wolverines and the Huskies both find themselves in this situation next season?
From LA to Piscataway, all Big Ten all year long. This is Big Ten 10.
Washington and Michigan are both extremely experienced college football teams, and they are both old football teams. And I think those are two big reasons why they find themselves in this championship game right now. They have seen it all in college football. They have battled through the trials and the tribulations of college football, and I think that experience really pays off in the end, and I think that's why both the Huskies and the Wolverines, that's part of the reason, right? They got pretty good talent, right? That's a pretty big reason why as well. But when you have that type of experience, and when you have those seniors and those super seniors and those COVID year seniors and those seventh year seniors and guys like that, you're going to have some turnover. Both Michigan and Washington are slated to have a pretty decent amount of turnovers, and both of these teams are going to look a lot different next season. And when you look at if these teams can get back to this level, I think it all depends on what happens these next couple of weeks and maybe this month or so after this national championship game as well. I don't think both of these teams are going to go off the deep end. This is not a situation where you win the national championship game or you lose the national championship game and all of a sudden the next year you're going 6-6, you're going in 7-5. That's not going to happen. I can see some people out there in Big Ten country bookmarking this part of the video just in case this does happen. But I don't believe that's going to happen. I think at worst these are maybe 8-win teams right next season. I think both of these teams going forward are going to be in the upper quadrant of the Big Ten Conference. I want to start first with the University of Washington bowing down to the Huskies. And boy, have defenses been bowing down to this offense. And let's just set some realistic expectations. You're going to take a step down on the offensive side of the ball, and that is not a bad thing, Washington fans, because you've had a generational offense. You've had the best offense in your school's history. You've had the best wide receiver room in your school's history. You've had a lot of best when it comes to the offensive side of the football. But when you have Kalen DeBoer as your head coach and when you still have Ryan Grubb as your offensive coordinator, you should still feel pretty confident about next season. And you should still feel pretty confident because Washington has already done a pretty decent job at building for 2024. Of course, it all starts at quarterback. You're going to lose Michael Penix Jr. 2 years in this system, and you're going to bring in Will Rogers from the transfer portal. That is a pretty big addition. I think actually this addition is flying under the radar a little bit. There's other quarterback additions that have gotten a little bit more press across the Big Ten and across college football. But Will Rogers have proven when he is in the right system, right, when he was in Mike Leach's air raid system, when they were throwing it around and this was a more open offense, he can put up some big-time numbers. And I believe his skill set fits really well with what Kalen DeBoer and Ryan Grubb really want to do going forward. And then you got to look at this wide receiver room. Like it's the best. You're going to take a step down. It's okay. But this wide receiver room, I don't know if it's going to take as much of a step down as some people think it is. It still might be pretty good next season. You look at Giles Jackson, who used his red shirt this season. He's going to be back next season. He was highly involved in the first part of the season in this offense as well. How about former Michigan State Spartan Jeremy Bernard? Played a special teams role, but he's been able to step up in a larger role kind of in these later games later on this season. I expect him to have a bigger role in the offense next season. What about Jeremiah Hunter, the Cal transfer, combined for just under 1,700 yards and 12 touchdowns the past 2 seasons at Cal? I could see him being a breakout player possibly in the Big Ten, one of the best newcomers possibly in the Big Ten in this offense. Already that right there with Rodgers and this combination at wide receiver, and we know what the system can do. I think that alone is still pretty good. Now, this offensive line, right, we know there's probably going to be some players that won't be back on this offensive line as well, so they're going to have to patch some of those holes. We'll see just how many holes that the Huskies will have to patch. But there's one player that was slated to be an impact player on this year's team, but an injury kind of held him out, and that's where I really want to hit a point home, and it's Cameron Davis, Right. He had a very good 2022. He was highly involved in this offense as well. He was supposed to be the top guy this season. Okay, when he went down, Washington kind of had to find a guy to step up. Of course, it ended up being Dylan Johnson, and he's done a really good job stepping up for the Huskies. But Cameron Davis had a nose for the end zone back in 2022, fourth in the Pac-12 in rushing touchdowns. You look at second on the team in rushing yards that season. I could very well see Cameron Davis coming back and being a big impact player in this offense. Now, don't forget, Dylan Johnson could also come back as well. I believe there's going to be more of a rushing emphasis maybe on this offense. Look, they're going to throw it around. I don't think there's any doubt about that in 2024. But you can maybe see this team, this offense, be a little bit more balanced. If you have you're going to have Cameron Davis returning next season, and if you get Dylan Johnson along with him as well, I think that could make this offense even boost up a little bit, right? The running game could be better in 2024 than it was in 2023, and that could really boost some things up as well. Now, it kind of depends what your offensive line is going to be. How do you patch that up with maybe some of the guys leaving from the Joe Moore Award-winning offensive line will also be a difference in what exactly happens with Washington. But having Cameron Davis back, I think he could be one of the impact players from one of these new teams in the Big Ten. That is Washington, Oregon, USC, and UCLA next season. Now, when you look at defense, right, we know this defense wasn't great statistically. Now, when you play Oregon twice, you play USC at their place where Caleb Williams maybe had one of, if not his best game of this season, like you're going to have those types of numbers. And then you have Northwestern on the schedule, Rutgers on the schedule, Iowa on the schedule. Right, maybe those numbers balance out a little bit with what you're losing on the defensive side of the ball. But once again, already in the transfer portal, even for a team that's in the college football playoff, they've made some big-time additions on the defensive side of the ball. Look, you're going to lose Braylon Trice, but you bring in Arizona State's B.J. Green off the edge. That's a very good add to be able to, I don't know if you're going to completely replace, right, Braylon Trice because he was a really good player on the defensive line. But B.J. Green, 11 tackles for loss, 6 sacks at Arizona State last season. Now, I'm not sure if Washington is going to be in the Big Ten championship race. There's a lot of good teams in this conference. They could maybe be a dark horse. I could see them. If everything clicks for the Huskies in 2024, and maybe they pull an upset against one of these teams that I'm going to talk about on their schedule coming up, maybe they could be in the race, but this is what wouldn't surprise me for the University of Washington. Maybe they're a little bit on the outside looking in terms of those top 2 teams that make the Big Ten championship game. But remember, next season, we got a 12-team playoff. So if you get into the top 10 in the country, you can find yourself into the CFP, right? We're going as a college football as a whole. We're going more towards an NFL model, and Washington could be one of those teams. You get hot at the right time, like an NFL team. You get hot right in the last few weeks of the season. You get into that wild card. You get into that first round on campus for Washington. That's something like a 10-2, be in the top 10 in the country. That wouldn't surprise me if the Huskies could possibly get to that point. But being, especially in this new era where the Big Ten and the SEC are really going to separate themselves, I'm just not sure with all of the Huskies are losing if they're going to find themselves in Indianapolis next season as well. When you look at Washington's schedule, look, they've got some of their tougher games earlier in the season in Seattle. You look at a home game against Michigan right in the first week of October. I could see Washington possibly being undefeated going into that game as well. They got a home game against USC, but when you look to November at Penn State and then finishing the season at Oregon, that is going to be no easy November. I could see Washington having a really good record earlier in the season, but once you get to November, we're really going to see what the Huskies are possibly all about. Let's move on to the Michigan Wolverines. We know they have been at the top of this conference for the last handful of years, for the last 3 years, ever since they beat Ohio State in that 2021 game in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Now, when you're a great college football team, and really you're a great football team at any level, you got 2 things figured out. You got stability at 2 areas, the head coach and the quarterback. Boy, are there some big-time question marks at head coach and quarterback as we head that way for the Michigan Wolverines in 2024. I even said this at the beginning of the season, and I hold that point, the same point even stronger right now, I would be shocked if Jim Harbaugh is coaching at Michigan at the start of 2024. Okay, because it was a last dance scenario. He flirted with the NFL the last 2 seasons, and now you add on 2 NCAA investigations, and he's got a gripe with kind of the way college football is structured right now. I think Jim Harbaugh just might be done with the whole college thing, especially if he wins tonight. If he wins the national championship, he will have brought Michigan back to prominence. He will have gotten them to the top of the college football mountain, and I think that really holds strong on his legacy, right? I think that's definitely a big point for him going forward, and if he can get them to that level, I think he'd be totally fine dipping to the NFL and possibly getting that Super Bowl, because we know that Super Bowl is something that he really wants on his resume and a goal that he really wants to accomplish as well. And if Jim Harbaugh does move on to the NFL like I expected him, Michigan, just please promote Sharon more. He's what he was able to do those last three games of the season and hold them together. Two of those 3 games were their toughest games of the season, at least in Big Ten play, against Penn State and Ohio State. How he held them together during those games, I just believe Sharon more, especially when we're as late as we are in the process. Just promoting him to head coach, you got to find a way to keep him in Ann Arbor if Jim Harbaugh does go up to the highest level of football. And then that's head coach, but what about quarterback? Okay, there is some uncertainty. J.J. McCarthy, will he stay or will he go? That's the big question. Now, when you look at these numbers right now, they don't exactly scream first-round draft pick. Some might say they don't exactly scream second-round draft pick either. But you got to look into the numbers a little bit. I think you got to look into the tape a little bit more when you look at J.J. McCarthy, because the numbers don't exactly stand out. They don't pop off the page because of the way Michigan plays football. Look at that game against Penn State where they just refused to throw the ball because they didn't have to, because that's how Michigan plays. I've been saying it all year long. Michigan will beat you any way they choose to beat you. If they can run the football 30 times in a 35-play stretch, they're going to do that. They don't feel like they need to do one thing or another. Earlier on in the season, midway through the season, they were throwing the ball a lot more. J.J. McCarthy was towards the top 10 in the country in some of these categories, but they ran the ball and got back to that Michigan bully ball as the season really progressed. So you look at him on tape, and he throws. He can make an NFL throw. But then there's other times when you look at the tape where you can really tell that he needs to get better at that straight drop back passer. He's really good at utilizing his legs, getting out, throwing on the run, creating that second tier of play. I could see him benefiting another offseason, coming back and being maybe one of the top quarterbacks in the 2025 NFL draft. This is a stacked 2024 class. When you look at Caleb Williams, when you look at Drake May, when you look at Michael Penix Jr., when you look at Jaden Daniels, there's a lot of talent at quarterback. Could he maybe go to the late first round? Could he go to the second round and fall into a good situation? Yeah, probably. Or you could come back with a nice NIL package and then put on a great season, and then you could possibly translate that into being one of the top quarterbacks in the 2025 NFL draft. So when we look forward to 2024, I think it depends on what J.J. McCarthy does, because if J.J. McCarthy does go to the NFL draft, then that opens some big-time questions for Michigan. Alex Orji, true freshman Jaden Davis, I don't think you're trotting out either one of those guys at quarterback for the Wolverines in 2024. I believe that if J.J. McCarthy makes his way to the NFL draft, the NFL Combine, eventually the National Football League, after April and May, I think they are going all in on Taulia Tagovailoa, right? He just entered the transfer portal. If he indeed is granted that waiver by the NCAA. Look, this guy is the all-time leading passer in Big Ten history. He's proven to have success in this league. And I think if Michigan wants to stay at that level towards the top of the Big Ten, you need an experienced guy. And you look at the transfer portal right now, a lot of the top quarterbacks are committed. But Taulia Tagovailoa just entered. making his way to Michigan could be beneficiary, I think, for both parties as well. If you kind of look beyond head coach and quarterback at 2024, man, this offensive line, they are going to have to reload. We are really going to see where the Michigan offensive line depth is next season. I was kind of looking into it. I think some of these guys could possibly return for another year, but I think a majority of these guys are going to make their way to the National Football League next season. We know that's been the cornerstone of Michigan football, has been that team up front. Can they replace those guys? And that could also be a determining factor if J.J. McCarthy comes back. If all these guys, the top 5, top 6 guys are wiped out, does J.J. McCarthy want to come in behind a brand new offensive line? I believe that could be a determining factor whether we see J.J. in Ann Arbor next season. What about the run game, right? We've been so used to Blake Corum these last 3 seasons. He's been a huge part. But what about Donovan Edwards? He took a step back this season. He just seemed to lack the pop. He just seemed to lack the explosiveness. We know the talent hasn't left. We know that Donovan Edwards has talent. We know that he can be one of the very best running backs in this conference. But maybe when he doesn't have the offensive line, and we'll see kind of how he splits carries. I could, with Khalil Mullings, I could see Mullings maybe coming into the fold a little bit. That could be, I think there's talent still there for Donovan Edwards. I think that's the point I want to make. And can Michigan find a way to bring out that talent in 2024 could be a good question. Now, when you look at their defense, there's a lot of really good players on that defense for the Michigan Wolverines. There's going to be a lot of NFL guys, but when you look at the guys returning to the Wolverines next season, there's some pretty good talent as well. I think this defense could still be really, really good and could still be one of the nation's top defenses next season. Like Will Johnson coming back, Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, Derek Moore on that defensive line coming back. How about Ernest Hausman in that linebacking core? And you could see some of these other guys possibly come back for another year of football. That defensive line, I think, will still maintain their spot as one of the top defensive lines in college football and will anchor this Michigan defense. There's still a lot of open pieces to really judge, but I believe Michigan will at least be in the conversation for 2024. Will they be at a national conversation at the Big Ten level, Big Ten championship type of level in 2024? But when we get to the national championship type of level, I think that's still up for debate. I think it determines what happens with quarterback, whether JJ is back or whether they get someone like Talia Tagovailoa. What happens with running back, how many of these offensive linemen go on to the next level, I think there's a little bit more question marks with a team like Michigan that I have right now and stuff that needs to be answered than maybe someone like Washington. I can see the picture becoming a lot more clearer with the Washington Huskies. But one gripe against the Wolverines in 2023 was their schedule. Okay, they said they played nobody, right? And they didn't play much of anybody until Veterans Day when they played Penn State and Happy Valley. It's the opposite right next season. They've got tough schedule. Check out these 5 games. Versus Texas in September, versus USC in their first conference game, at Washington to start October, home against Oregon, and at Ohio State. Considering what they are losing next season, all of those games are going to be very, very difficult for Michigan in 2024. Do I view both Michigan and Washington as national championship contenders right now in 2024? Right now, as we speak, long way away from September. As we speak right now, I just don't know if they're national championship caliber teams. But I think both the Wolverines and the Huskies can be playoff teams in a 12-team era when we start this thing next season.
Thanks for watching Big Ten Ted, where it's all Big Ten all year long. Make sure to like the video to spread the word of Big Ten Ted to the masses, and subscribe to the channel for updates on Big Ten content that drops every day.